You are listening to the Wildlife Photography Podcast with Rob Reed and Josh Galicki, bringing together the love of nature and photography. Episode 12. We discuss underwater photography with a special guest. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the Wildlife Photography Podcast with me, Rob Reed, and my co-host Josh Galicki. Hey Josh, how's it going?
Hey, good, Rob. Great to be chatting again.
Yeah, absolutely. And we actually got to meet up, didn't we? Not, a few weeks ago on your way back from Shetland.
So yeah, we made it happen. The day of Wimbledon, I think Wimbledon was going on at that time.
It was.
You had some traffic coming in, but
bit of traffic. No, so I managed to get down to Heathrow, and we had a couple of hours and lunch, with Khurram as well, Khurram Khan, on your way back through and your way back to the States. So that was good to finally meet up.
Yeah, totally agree. And the way back was actually a lot easier than the way in. We had to turn around in Shetland. It was a 2.5 day journey, a bit Frodo Baggins, but on the way back, it was a lot easier.
Yeah, because you were in Shetland a couple of weeks after me, so this is the first time we've recorded a podcast since we both got back.
Yeah, so we've got a lot of photos to go through, Rob. I suspect both of us, but it was.
And we've got a lot of chatting to do about that place, which we're going to do another episode actually. Specifically on Shetland, and we'll get Rebecca Nason involved with that because obviously she runs with her partner Phil. They run the Noss boat, so they do wildlife trips out to Noss and all those fantastic seabird colonies, which you and I both did when we were out there. So and talking of Shetland, our guest today is no stranger to Shetland, and he's just come back from Shetland too. So I'm delighted today that we're joined by Henley Spiers, and we're going to be talking about underwater photography, which I have to confess I know very, very little about, and I think you're the same, Josh. So this is going to be a really interesting conversation. So I'm really glad that Henley's here. So Henley, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Rob, Josh. Thanks for having me along to talk Shetland, maybe, and certainly underwater.
Well, I'm sure we'll, Shetland will be part of the conversation at some point. Henley, why don't you tell people out there a little bit about yourself and, perhaps how you got into photography and, how you make a living and all that. So they get a bit more of background on you.
Okay, I'll try to aim for the medium version of that story. I got into photography really late. So my path is far more to do with the ocean and sort of the underwater world than photography for a long time. And even actually, it didn't really involve much of that. So I was lucky in that I think really thanks to my parents, I started snorkeling probably when I was about 6 years old or so. I didn't grow up by the sea or anything like that. But I did start snorkeling young. And then I did my first scuba dive when I was 12 years old. But I don't want to give the impression that I really had a sense of where I was going. And it was probably not me pushing for those things. It was probably my parents pushing me to do it. And I only belatedly appreciated all of that. And I really enjoyed snorkeling. I recall my first scuba dives and first few years of scuba diving being a little bit frustrating, I think, because I had trouble equalizing because I wasn't, I was an air hog. I'd sort of suck up my tank very fast. And I was a young boy and used to being competitive about things. And if you're going to be competitive about anything in scuba diving, people tend to be competitive about their air consumption, which almost invariably males win, which is quite a funny thing to always see in a sort of the calm female diver almost always beats the adrenaline-filled male diver. And so I definitely enjoyed it, but it was one of many things that I liked. And I never thought about the ocean or nature or wildlife as a potential career. And I went down a very conventional path. I finished up school, did fairly well. I went to university where I studied history, which, no, I wasn't trying to be a historian, but the idea in the UK is that you don't really have to do something which is going to bring you to a definite endpoint unless you want to be a doctor or a lawyer. So my idea in doing a history degree was that I was going to follow my dad's rough footsteps into the business world, go and work in London and, you know, have a briefcase or things like that. So I continued down that path, and I entered the corporate world after university. I became a marketing consultant. And what does that mean? Well, my company had the rights to the club card data. And what we would do is not very fluffy marketing. We would actually interpret that data and then deliver the results to whoever our clients may be. So I started out working with Nestle as my client, and then I ended up as the category lead consultant to Tesco for the bakery, dairy, and counters categories, which on a practical level, that meant I would go into their headquarters and talk to the team about, well, you know, sort of what promotions were working and what cheese should be in this store and what, you know, cheese should be next to this cheese and things like that.
This is a far cry from underwater photography.
Yeah, I guess that's my point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was, you know, a completely different life. And I suppose the relic of it is that I still today have a habit of lingering in supermarkets a bit too long, because I still retain a little bit of an interest. But for sure, it wasn't my passion. You know, I think you can make things interesting because, you know, that's your nature. But it wasn't what sort of, you know, like drove me down to my core. And the problem was that I was not very happy and I was very stressed. And alongside this, during my holidays, I was often scuba diving and taking more and more enjoyment out of being underwater, just a sense of calm and wonder and exploration at that underwater world. And I made a promise to myself to take a year out, which is quite common in the UK for people to take a year out, maybe sort of before they go to university or things like that. And so I drove myself to a second promotion at my company, which made me the youngest at my grade. And on the face of it, everything was really rosy. I was on the fast track to, you know, whatever great things were in store in the corporate world. And 2 weeks later, I handed in my notice, much to their consternation. And they were, I mean, I was pretty naive about it all, but they were very good about it in terms of, they say, okay, hang on, Henley, why don't you just take a sabbatical for a year and then come back to us once you've, you know, sowed your wild oats and realized that, you know, the real world is waiting for you. And when I made that decision, the big thing which I was determined to do was to change my life and to go and be a dive professional on a tropical island. I thought to myself, that is the way to go. And so I did it. I went to the Philippines and I became a dive master, and I had a complete change of life. I went from a sort of a very material existence in London with, you know, many nice things and places and you know, things like that, to one where I just had a bed and a fan and a toilet outside, which sometimes worked. But the key thing was that I would wake up really early every morning and I would dive right into the night, learning how to be a dive professional and taking people out diving. And I had never felt more myself, and I never felt happier. And that was really the start of the end as far as my corporate career. And but it was still really a tussle, actually, at that time. It seems obvious now, but in the months following my dive master apprenticeship, I really wrestled with what to do, whether to continue down this path, which seemingly was making me so fulfilled, or whether to, you know, go back to all the things which I built. And you know, and I think conventional thinking was, you'd be crazy not to go back, you know. like, what are you gonna, how are you gonna fulfill your ambitions and then sort of make a life as a dive pro, like a dive bum, basically. And it was tricky to decide that, but I met a chap called Roger Moore, not Bond, another one, who is
I was going to say, didn't know he dived.
Did he have a golden gun with him? Right? Was it?
I think I wish.
What,
No,
did he have that? What was it? What was the car that he had underwater? Did he meet him that way?
Yeah, that was a Lotus,
It was
wasn't
a
it?
Lotus. It was a Lotus.
Yeah.
A Lotus. Was it a Lotus Elise or something? Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah,
show my age
that
here.
would be cool. Yeah,
Yeah, it would.
No,
Sorry,
I'm a big fan
I'm interrupting you.
no problem. And anyway, this Roger Moore was an intuitive therapist, and what he does is quite strange. And I can't say that this is the kind of thing I go in for all the time, but at that moment it was pretty good, because you meet Roger and you talk to him, and he's sketching on a pad without looking at it, and then he gives you this really funky massage, which is actually really painful, and you end up like retching and spitting, and it's kind of it's a real, quite weird stuff, really. But the good thing was that all of that came at the right time, because Roger helped me to see that there were many possible paths which would be fruitful, but there was one which I was probably more close to my essence, my spirit, I suppose. And that allowed me to reflect and make the decision of what to do based on my heart and my gut rather than my head. And I still say today that if I have any wisdom to impart to my daughters, that would be the only thing I'd say, is when it comes to the big decisions in life, what you're going to do, who you're going to spend it with, I believe that you should make that decision with your heart and your gut. Don't try to be too rational about it. And so I went for it, resigned, and went on to become a dive instructor, working in Indonesia, in St. Lucia. And that was great. But the issue is that when you start to work in your passion, you can lose the passion. And that was the part which scared me, and which I could see other friends, colleagues, professionals struggling with, is that because actually usually what happens when you work in these kind of industries, as you guys will know, is that there's a beautiful aspect to it, but there is also a reality in terms of this kind of the work which must go in, and the sort of the grit in the grind that you don't see behind the supposed glamour.
Yeah, and the same can happen in photography. And if you're talking purely about photography, then it's great as a as a pastime, as a way to take yourself away from that, perhaps sort of that work environment. But when you start to rely on it for an income, it does change things slightly. And I get exactly what you're saying about, does that then dilute the passion and take it away? Because it's no, that thing is no longer that release. It then the pressure starts to build on you performing in that area, because you have to pay the bills somehow. So I get it entirely.
To make a decision, though, to follow your passion is incredible. And I think that's such an incredible story, Henley. I mean, I know so many people that they go down a career of something they don't mind, or maybe they don't even like. And the anticipation is, when I retire in 30 some years or 40 years, at that point in time, I'll do what I want to do. And that's, in my opinion, the wrong way to go. And, what you did and the decision you made, I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah, I did it myself. I mean, I did something for 20, 25 years that I learned to hate, actually. The problem was I was very good at it. That, and then you go down a path, you're good at something, you don't necessarily enjoy it. But of course, you get to a certain point where if you're in your early 20s, it doesn't really matter, because you don't have too many responsibilities. But when you find yourself, another 10 years on, and you're getting into your 30s, you've got a mortgage, you may have, get married, you may have kids, as in my case. And then it's much more difficult to make those decisions, to follow different paths in your life when you have certain responsibilities that you need to fulfill. So absolutely, if anybody's listening to this that has the ability to at least give it a go and follow a passion and follow your gut, as you say, then I'd take it. Certainly take a chance before you get into this sort of rhythm of life that's very difficult to break because you have responsibilities. So I didn't think the podcast was going to go down this route today. So that's
it's
anyway,
Roger Moore's fault,
It is all Roger Moore's fault. Yeah, absolutely. Blame 007.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with you both, but I took that decision. Sometimes I think to myself, would you make the same decision today? And the difference is I've got a family and 2 children. And I think if it's just me, I make the same call. But if it's me and a family, I think I don't know. I don't know if I make the same call.
No, it's much more difficult because you've got more things to think about, haven't you? You've got much more to lose that way. You've got more responsibility, and it's more difficult.
And if we're talking about the practical side, okay, maybe, as you said, maybe someone might listen to this and wonder about their own career and things. What I think is really interesting in photography, and perhaps even more open than ever before, with actually what the pandemic took us through in terms of people reassessing their work-life balance and the flexibility within that, is I think there's really a big space for like being a semi-pro, for kind of having that passion and actually being very good and being able to have a professional element that you kind of carry with you part of the year, and you're doing certain things in a professional fashion whilst retaining the security of whatever other career you have alongside that. And sort of, and I think if I was to advise people, I'd say if you're in that position, that's really the best of both worlds. And then sort of you can really make the decision to sort of take off all the shackles only if you kind of understand what it is to be a professional photographer or enough. And if you have built it up enough to know that, okay, well, I can move from this moving train to another moving train.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, the thing is, I get asked this quite a lot by people. It's like, well, how do you make a living from, well, in particular, wildlife photography? And the answer to that is it's bloody difficult. Particularly now with the advancements in technology and the ability for more people to take great pictures, with the equipment that we have. And I have to say, the general lack of the material that's consumed. If you're a magazine editor, and this is not having a go at those people, but they've had their budgets slashed quite dramatically over the last 10 or 20 years. So I always call it the that'll do attitude, whereas you might have a picture that somebody wants £200 for a cover, and then you've got another picture which isn't as good, but it'll do, and you pay £10 for it. The magazine editor is going to choose that £10 image, and that's the problem. That
years ago there were only a few people too, right, Rob? I mean,
yeah.
They dealt in print and the like, and I think, like as you say, there's so many more people in this business, and the advent of AI is already making impacts in photography. I think outside of, at least from my standpoint, the folks that I see that are doing well full time, it's mostly in an educational setting, workshops, bringing people along, having that, teaching them about photography, how to use their camera, and also the experience too. If you're doing a workshop in Alaska, Africa, or some of these places that are also beautiful, there's a tourism aspect to it as well. I think there's probably a continued space for that market, but it's going to be difficult in some of the other markets, whether it's print or some of the things that traditionally got people by.
Yeah, and I think you have to have a niche, don't you, in the market as well. You have to carve out your edge. And I guess, with underwater photography, that's your niche, Henley. And that's, because diving came first for you quite clearly, because it's a real skill.
Yeah.
diving is a real skill. I mean, it must have taken you years to get really proficient, and comfortable underwater to the point where you can perhaps not think about, the elements with, you're in, to be able to concentrate on taking good photos at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird one, because like I said, I studied history, and then I look back on where I am now, and I feel like I'm on a definitive, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life if I can. And I think back and I think, I wish I'd studied marine biology or something like that. But it's true that those years as a dive instructor made being in the water a kind of a very natural thing for me. They taught me how to find things underwater, how to understand environments, all of that. So yeah, for sure, all of those skills actually play a big part in, we all only have so many brain cells, and the more brain cells that can be devoted to photography as opposed to worrying about whatever, diving or being out of breath, things like that, is a positive for the creation of images. So yeah, actually, being a dive pro was quite a good route into this. And I'm an underwater wildlife photographer. I sort of dabble in a bit of topside, but I don't kid myself that my results are at all on par with what I might be able to create underwater. And I think it's perhaps intimidating to think that you need to get that comfort in the water. But on the other hand, I think I'm kind of lucky and with the other underwater photographers, because I would actually hate to have the pressure of going topside and creating really fresh, really powerful imagery, which could now enable a professional career. Because I think at least I have a natural barrier to my area, and there's fewer people in it, and the animals underwater interact differently. Like, I mean, let's say to go on Africa and safari and create something new. I mean, wow, that is
it's difficult to do.
A lot more difficult. Yeah,
difficult to do.
That's interesting too. Actually, I do have a few questions for you, Henley, as it relates to underwater photography. But even before that, you were talking about your experience and how you got into diving. When did you decide to pick up a camera, and how did you get into wildlife underwater photography from diving?
So I remember my first sort of camera that I brought underwater was like really just like a compact little thing. And the only purpose of that was to sort of document the adventure. So I would mostly teach upcoming professional divers. So I had a group of interns, people who would come to Bali where I worked, and I would have 10 to 30 of them in my charge, and they were training to be dive masters. So we would have a month, 2 months, 3 months all together. And so we were like this merry band going around, and I would sort of, document what we were doing. But I wouldn't say that was really photography. That was just kind of some snapping along. So the turning point, I would say, was that I went on a diving holiday, to a place called Lembeh in Indonesia, which is renowned as a great macro photography destination. And I really liked small things, just to look at them. But I went to this place, Lembeh, and you find that there, the difference was, and this was especially different back then, is that 95% of the divers who went there were serious underwater photographers as hobbyists. And so I had my little rig like this, and they had these huge, they had cameras which, like the one behind me, which is kind of for those listening, is like a big housing, and then you would attach strobes on it, and it was a completely different kettle of fish. And after a few days of diving with them, I was curious, and I rented a kind of a serious unit. Actually, it was an Olympus EM5 in a housing, which to me was like, wow, that's an incredible camera, with one strobe. And I was given a kind of a little intro on how to use it. And then we went underwater and took pictures with that. And that was really a wow moment in terms of the color and the crispness. Because one of the things also we have underwater is huge loss of color. I mean, Are you guys snorkelers, divers, anything like that?
I've snorkeled. I've never been on a dive before, actually.
Yeah,
but
a bit of snorkeling, but never been scuba diving.
But that's okay. But you will still understand. So when you go snorkeling, you're looking down. Everything looks bluey green, more or less.
Yeah.
And that's because of the loss of color in water. So essentially, you've lost your red and your orange within 5 meters of the surface very easily. And so actually, even when we're on a dive, let's say at 10, at 20, at 30 meters, and we're looking around and we're thinking, wow, this is a really good time. Actually, we're not seeing the real color of things. And so that can be one of the powers of photography. So a lot of underwater photography requires a flash or some sort of light. And we bring back those colors. So one of the cool things about underwater photography is actually, in a sense, we really see the underwater wildlife for what it is, rather than this kind of bluey greeny thing. And so that was really kind of one of the, that was one of the wow.
Topside, we always think, okay, well, what do you see through the camera? You're trying to recreate what your eye is seeing, where it's just the opposite underwater. That's an interesting analogy.
But I love photography for this as well, in all sorts of ways, that it allows you sometimes to see things that you couldn't ordinarily see. It's a bit like if you take a really fast shutter speed photograph of a bird doing something, so you're freezing a moment in time which your human eye would miss, or you've got a macro subject and you're blowing it up however many times, life size, so you're seeing details that you can't see with your own eye, and that for me is when photography gets really interesting. And I didn't really appreciate, because I haven't really thought about it, that sort of loss of color, as you get deeper, and the way you can bring that back to life through photography. That hadn't crossed my mind at all. So this is, that for me is one of the things that I really love about photography, that you can put in front of people things that you can't necessarily see with the human eye at times.
And it works well with bringing back the color. When I think of underwater photographs, the colors and the saturation stand out. I think it looks much richer. And maybe that has something to do with the photographer and the processing and the like. But I think using the strobes and some of the, whether it's fish or whatever, I just think the colors are so rich and it stands out versus topside photography. That's always been something.
And that is all, most of it will be thanks to flash. So if we're talking about how underwater photography takes place, in contrast to, let's say, the type of photography which you two have mostly done, it's very different in the sense of most of what I do, well, not a lot of what I do involves flash. And I know some topside photographers get so funny about flash and it ruining images, but that really is quite a strange thing for an underwater photographer to wrap their head around, because without the flashes, we're so restricted.
I think it's mainly because people don't understand it, if I'm honest, and they're quite scared of flash for some reason. I've never really understood why, but I think that's generally why people have that attitude, or can have that attitude. It's because they're frightened of it.
Well, we're certainly not underwater. And in fact, that's considered part of your core gear. And then the other the challenge and the privilege of underwater photography, again, due to the subject matter that we are shooting through water, is that it robs you not only of color, but it robs you of clarity, meaning that more or less everything you shoot needs to be within maybe 2 meters of you. And so that's also what's kind of cool is, my lions underwater, sea lion, shark, whatever it may be, I am within arm's length of them when I have an interaction and a shoot with them, which I think to consider that, if you tried to even think or do that in, on a safari or something, you would be considered nuts and really severely putting yourself in danger. But that is the obligation of underwater photography in order to achieve it technically. And one of the great things is the animals underwater, for the most part, they just interact with us differently. They seem to realize just how rubbish we are at sort of basically being underwater. And I mean, even like the most, pathetic looking pufferfish is going to outswim you. And so they approach us. Many of us, I'm able to get close enough to take a photo of them, which means really close. And sometimes they're even kind of a bit inquisitive in a way that, it's just so, maybe unless you went to the Galapagos or places like that, it's so rare to find that on land. Yeah. And so that's what, like, the rest of it is still photography. But those key elements, color, clarity, proximities to subjects, and behavior of underwater wildlife, that's probably the key areas where the life aquatic is different.
Yeah, the behavior must be refreshing. I mean, when you're on land, everything's running away from you versus coming in, with a sense of curiosity. To your point of how close you need to be, what's the most common focal length you use when you're photographing wildlife underwater?
So kind of historically, an underwater photographer's kit bag would need 2 key lenses. And one is a fisheye, which would almost never be used on the top side because of its ability to focus close and to portray a very wide scene. And we don't usually have to worry about what's it called? About sort of we can't see the Earth's curve in our photos, so we don't have to worry as much about that distortion. And then the second lens, so we would use that historically to do all the big stuff. And then we would use a macro lens to do the smaller stuff, a close focusing macro lens. And historically, those have been the 2 key lenses in an underwater photographer's kit bag. Now that's evolved a little bit with some sort of new innovations and things, but that remains essentially true. So you're thinking 15mm fisheye, 60mm or 105mm macro. That's your starter kit.
Okay.
That's interesting because I kind of got the fisheye, but I also thought that there would be, perhaps that sort of 16 to 35 type area as well would be a popular choice. Is that something that you use a lot, or is it really the sort of fisheye which is your go-to starting point, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, many people like a 16-35 for sort of a more rectilinear wide look, but. Okay, so one of the other things with underwater photography is you're not just shooting that lens and the camera but on its own. You've got to have a window to what you're photographing. And so, these are called dome ports. And so macro lenses, it's fine. They just sit behind a flat dome port. But the wide angle lenses, the fisheyes, the 16-35, they go behind a sort of like a huge curved porthole. And one of the other big things which underwater photographers are really bothered about is that when you put these lenses behind these kind of porthole windows, dome ports, funny things can start to happen to your image corners. And if you haven't got the right size dome port or the right extension of that dome port to the lens, basically your corners can very quickly turn to mush. And so there's, say, with a 16-35 underwater, if you talk to underwater photographers, they're like really into their corners and they're really trying to hit, F11, F13, F16 with their wide angle lenses, because otherwise the corner detail is just unusable. Mm. And so one of the most interesting areas of innovation in underwater photography, which is around essentially glass, which is built to be used underwater, and that can then yield a different behavior of the apertures, allowing you to use more light from the camera. So maybe rather than shooting at f13, you can now be at f8, but you're still comfortable with the image quality. And this actually goes right the way back, because if we really say talk about like kind of the, let's say, the heyday of David Dubillay, and just a few professional underwater photographers in the world using film cameras, they were using often the Nikonos range, which was a range built by Nikon of cameras which were ready to go underwater and lenses to go with it. So those were actually, you just picked up the camera, stuck on your lens, and you were ready to go. You didn't need a housing. And at some point that became uneconomical for Nikon to pursue. But that glass, which they made back then, is still some of the best glass that you can use. So I have a vintage Nikonos fisheye lens, which is incredible, and which would also be used by, BBC Natural History Unit productions and things like that. So those are kind of some of the like technical warriors of underwater photographers.
And I would imagine edges are important because there's not a lot of cropping as well. I mean, you're so close to your subject. I mean, when we photograph birds, there's always a bit of cropping. You want to level the sky, or you want to come in maybe 10, 20% or whatever. But I would imagine a lot of photography underwater, there's not a lot of cropping, right? I mean, you're almost full frame with a lot of your output, I suspect.
Yeah, I think there's really, so the kind of the most popular diving destinations are tropical coral reefs. And the point of a tropical coral reef is it's a rainforest of the sea. It's all these colors, huge diversity of life, lots of density of it in a small area. And so a lot of the photographs which we would almost immediately associate with this is the underwater world would be a coral reef, and it's just coral, fish everywhere. It's a very busy scene, and that's in those kind of classic cases for sure. You're worried about, oh no, this kind of coral in the corner is looking a bit funny.
And Henley, I do have another question as it relates to exposure underwater. So using strobes, do you often use flash as a main light, meaning you're set up to just take advantage of the artificial light in your exposures, or are you blending the ambient in, whether, for like a blur effect? I mean, what are the most common approaches to getting images underwater in terms of exposure?
I think they're so most underwater photographers would be macro and wide angle, or they would devote themselves to one discipline within that. And for the macro photography, I think the controlling light using artificial light, your strobes, is really, that's the kind of way. And for a long time, one of the most aspired to images within macro underwater photography was just, creature black background, which you're finding ways to remove all of the ambient light and just shape it with your strobe. Now, doing that on wide angle subjects is both tricky and I'd say a bit underwhelming in many cases. And actually, so whereas underwater, I feel the challenge of macro photography is around the focus. Stabilizing it's macro photography is about focus in general, but underwater you've got to stabilize yourself and
because there's no tripod.
No.
I hadn't. That's something that hadn't even crossed my mind. When you start talking about sort of macro work, you think, topside is just. I mean, a lot of the stuff I do handheld, but sometimes you just can't get away with it. You have to use a tripod. And you don't have that option underwater, so that hadn't even crossed my mind. So that's a really interesting point.
Yeah, I mean, some of the sort of hot macro destinations are those which have sandy bottoms, and so I think part of that is not only the availability of critters, but the ability of people to sort of stick a hand down or perhaps even lie down on the sand to photograph something. But it's if you're on top of your game, you should be able to sort of get the macro creature whilst just floating neutrally buoyant. And the water has a cushioning effect, so it does help us a little bit too. Sort of you move really gently.
Sorry, that's my phone going. Everybody, let me just turn that off. Sorry, should have left that downstairs.
And to go back to the wide angle part of all of this, I think the sort of the most successful wide angle images and actually the biggest challenge within them is exactly what you said. It's blending this flashlight, which we almost always have to use, and that natural light. And I think when you start to do that well, that's when you kind of feel like a degree of satisfaction as a photographer. When it just looks natural and yet you've blended those two things, I think you're on the right road.
Yeah. Well, I think that goes for photography topside as well, because that's what if I'm actually going to use flash, generally speaking, that's what I will try and do, is try and make the image look as natural as possible. So you're using it as fill-in flash, or just to give that extra element to something. Or you might, I quite often use flashes underneath things or behind things to add sort of to make them stand out from backgrounds, for example, or just give them that little pop of color, or that little directional light that they just need, just to focus a viewer's attention on the image, but not to the point where people go, oh, that's obviously, he's obviously used a flash there. I think that sort of subtle use of flash, you know, is really very clever. That's how a really good photograph comes together. And I guess sort of when we're talking about underwater photography, that's a real skill. That's a real skill with all the other elements that you have to deal with.
Some of those images, and I think they're the most artistic from what I see for underwater photography. It's the equivalent of like a rear curtain sync, what we would do, you know, where you blend the ambient and you get some motion in there. You have the color. I think it makes for great imagery. It really does.
Yeah, and then you've got that little sort of frozen element at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I agree.
Which you need the flash for. And to go back to your earlier point, my personal taste and aspiration, you know, we were talking about photography as a way to allow you to see the world, but I think the images which are my favorite are those, a frame which is more than you could possibly see with your naked eye. And that's why I think I'm drawn to the slow shutter work and things like that. Like, I think that's when photography can maybe more start to become an art form as created by the photographer rather than nature as art, which is when actually you've played a role in elevating it to something which, you know, even if you were really eagle-eyed, you would never see it like that. But it is a true representation, you know. I like that a lot.
Yeah, so you're getting away from that sort of literal representation in the truest form, and you're introducing that artistic element in, as you say, to show people things they can't see with their naked eye. Yeah.
And that's one beauty about photography. A lot of people are discussing, you know, will photography still be relevant in the future in light of video and all these other things that most either consumer cameras or pro cameras have right now. And a lot more people are doing, and you have TikTok and Reels and everything else, and it's been video dominant. But I think the ability to create art through a photograph, it's hard to replace that with video. You know, when I think of video, it's more so on the documentation side, the more literal side. So when I think when you turning nature into art, I think that is going to keep photography around. Hopefully,
I don't think you'll ever take the power of the still image away.
Yeah.
You know, I really don't. If you think about, okay, for example, the image of the seahorse clasping onto the cotton bud. And how, if you think about the power of that image and the effect that had, I mean, that changed government legislation, that single image. And when you think about that, I know that's more of a literal representation and we're kind of getting away from the sort of artistic side of things. But when you're talking about the power of photography, I think if you think about that single image, and everybody listening to this will be able to conjure that up in their mind, because I don't think there's a single person that hasn't seen that photograph. When you think how powerful that can be, I just think that's the incredible side of photography, and that's why I think, you know, all three of us love it so much, is because you can't get that with video necessarily. That single image just imprints on your brain. It's just can have such a powerful message.
Yeah,
totally agree. And I think, you know, as an aspiration for a photographer would be to, you know, aim to and hope to at some point in our careers to create an image which could imprint on minds in that way, you know. And maybe you get one if you're really lucky and good, you know, like, and of course this is not just nature photography, you know, it's the girl running from the napalm explosion in Vietnam. You know, these things which, you know, you saw it once and you can never forget it, whether it's for good or bad. Although interesting to bring up that, you know, the picture which you've referred to of the seahorse with the cotton bud was actually quite a contentious image in the underwater photography societies, because of concerns as to whether it was authentically created or not. It actually really, you know, stirred up huge debate, and which is, you know, I think it's the example of any niche, you know, sort of someone like, I was just talking to my friends in Shetland, and I said, oh, do you like the series Shetland, which is this crime detective series? And they said, well, yes, but, you know, it's not really geographically accurate and stuff like that. So they're so into that place and everything which goes on that for them it's hard to walk away from that. Whereas for everyone else, which is 99.9% of the population, it's, wow, you just take in the story and the message and the things. And I think that was probably true of the picture which you've just referred to, which is, for most, it's just they got the message. Whereas for us, who this is kind of like what we live and breathe, we were really, you know, really thinking about, would that really happen? Or, you know, did he coax it and things like that? But does it matter? I don't know. You know, like, it's for, you have to have, I suppose, some sort of industry self-policing to a certain extent. But then, like, is there this, you know, big greater good argument? Like, just as weird. So there were pictures which appeared of face masks, you know, during the COVID era, of those with animals underwater. And again, it raised the same questions of sort of, you know, what's the condition of the face mask? Do we think he brought it down or she brought it down?
Is this an authentic shot, or is it set up?
Yeah.
So there were conversations, I guess, around that image. Somebody was underwater and just
I mean, I suppose that would be the extreme version of the story. But, you know, seahorses, despite their beauty, they are actually really terrible swimmers. So they grasp onto things because they're very bad at swimming, and they basically have a complete almost a lack of a stomach, and so they have to almost constantly eat. And so they are actually quite pathetic creatures in a sense, despite their beauty. And so a seahorse underwater is actually one of the easier things to push around and to make do what you want. So I suppose, and there have been examples, I'm not talking of that picture, but there have been examples, for example, you know, often a seahorse is a benthic creature in most cases, meaning it sits on the seabed, usually against something quite unattractive. And so you have some underwater pictures of seahorses mid-water against a nice sunburst and things like that. And there are some species of seahorse which are pelagic, but for the most part, they're not. And so it's kind of, again, these kind of images raise questions as to, well, it wouldn't be that hard for a photographer to pop a seahorse up in the water and to get the better composition.
Yeah. You see, this is interesting, isn't it? Because, you know, you have knowledge of that world that the majority of people don't. So as you say, when I look at an image like that, I wouldn't necessarily know that because I don't know their behavior. But it's similar, I guess, in a lot of ways when Josh and I look at images of birds, the majority of people so say you've got a bird that's sat on the perfect perch with the perfect background, it's singing its head off, and most people go, oh, isn't that a wonderful picture? Well, Josh and I will know exactly how that's taken. And it won't be without interference from the photographer. There'll be
JBL boombox underneath.
There'll be a speaker blasting its song, you know, out from underneath it, agitating the hell out of the thing. You get it to sit where the photographer wants, and to get it animated in that way. Oh, it's fine. Okay, so you've produced this image, and we've had this discussion before when we had Georgina Statler on the program, you know, on the podcast, you know, and the effect that those sorts of things can have, you know, on birds. You know, so the argument could be that if you do it once and you get the picture, how much have you agitated the bird? How much have you affected it? Probably not a lot. But if you've got a bird that a dozen people have done that to, then that's a whole different ballgame. And of course, the more popular photography gets, the more that's going to happen. you in the underwater world, as you were alluding to earlier, you've got this barrier, haven't you, that prevents the number of people, I guess, that we're getting topside and are having access to or getting into wildlife photography, and the pressure that is starting to have on certain species, certain locations. You haven't necessarily got that as much on in the sort of underwater world, because you have that barrier not only of knowledge but expertise, the ability to dive, and of course what we haven't really sort of touched on yet is the cost of it all. I mean, when you're looking at all these sort of specialist domes and all that specialist glass, I mean, you're not talking £20 for a little plastic housing you can just dunk under the water. You're talking much more than the camera in a lot of these circumstances, aren't you?
Yeah. So that's another thing with I mean, in one sense, a GoPro is a capable underwater video camera which you could just buy in a shop, and you could take it down to 10 meters free diving, and actually you could do some quite impressive things with it, especially in terms of filmmaking. But there's a reason why you've got a Z9, Rob. There's a reason why I'm shooting a Nikon D850. It's because when you get into it, you want the fault point to be us, not the equipment. And you want to try and, it's all the more so with wildlife photography, where many of the moments we witness are unrepeatable. If you didn't capture that frame because of a failing of the camera, or because of sort of it's not at the maybe it's even not at the resolution that you want, I don't know, you'd be frustrated. So yes, undoubtedly, as if you get into it, you're going to want the gear, and the gear is expensive, and it's at least doubly, well, I mean, in a sense, it's doubly expensive to topside photography, because every element has to be housed. So, and there's different housings on the market, sure, but roughly speaking, you buy the camera and you've got to spend the same again, if not more, on the housing. Then you have to have whatever port goes with the lens and all of this. So yeah, I mean, let's say sort of you're looking probably £5,000 to £10,000 if you're buying new to get into this with a pretty serious rig, because you also need the strobes and all the accessories to go with it. So yeah, it's not cheap by any means, and I think that's reflected in most of the hobbyists that I encounter. It's a lot of the people that I say I might lead on trips, they have a certain disposable income, which usually means that they are sort of at a certain point in their career to be able to afford the gear, the holidays to take you to the destination. So yeah, there's there are quite a few barriers to underwater photography. But one of the ones which I would like to dispel a little bit as we're talking is that you need to be a scuba diver, because you absolutely do not. You can achieve really great things just snorkeling, free diving, but there's a lot to be done. And actually, photography has brought me closer to the surface than ever in my dive career before. If I can, I will snorkel, and I'm I won't be too proud to admit that. Like, I mean, snorkeling brings you more light. It brings you more interesting elements. You can see the surface. You could do maybe a split level image, and it brings you more time, because you don't have the same physiological constraints in terms of absorbing nitrogen, which at some point basically tries to kill you if you're diving, or just getting cold, because that is also the real thing underwater. Is our time is ticking away so fast, whereas I could maybe snorkel for 3-4 hours, maybe I can dive for an hour and a half, I don't know.
I was going to ask you about that, actually. Is if you are scuba diving, I mean, I guess it will generally depend on where you are and the temperature of the water to a degree, but obviously all those other issues that you mentioned as well. I mean, generally speaking, so you've got tanks on your back. How long have you got for a dive? Is that about an hour, as you were alluding to?
I mean, okay, let's say as far as kind of just your fairly typical recreational dive with an 11-liter tank of air on your back. If you're going to 20 meters and then getting a bit shallower, then yeah, you've probably got an hour to an hour and a half if you're good. And so that is also, I think, quite different to what you might feel, that in terms of, say, staking out wildlife, I can't stay there very long. And so it's difficult to sort of just, I can't just wait a couple of days. You look at, say, the work of like Vincent Munier, the French wildlife photographer, who made this documentary about the panther in I think it's sort of the Himalayas, somewhere around there. Anyway, it's beautiful, and he's a phenomenal photographer, but he has such a sense of time and oneness that he kind of can create with his environment, with his subjects. I'm in awe of, but is more or less impossible underwater, because you just don't have the time to sit there and be like, okay. I mean, you do for a few minutes, but not for hours or for days.
To that point, Henley, when you're on a shoot, before you shoot, do you do scouting dives where you'll go down without a camera just to get a feel of what's there, what the activity's like, and then when you grab your camera, can you go in subsequent to that and at least have some sort of knowledge of what you can expect, because you're dealing with such a tight time frame, right? Is that a process you go through, or is that more reactive?
No, Josh, I feel naked without a camera in my hands. So it's like one thing which happened since I started getting serious about underwater photography is like, I just can't dive without a camera. It's just, who knows what's going to happen, and I might miss it. And I suppose it's for the wildlife and the unpredictability. And it's for the time, because, that dive could have been a photo dive. So yeah, it can't be, because you can't just like do one after the other. You have to sort of break it up and all of this. So no.
So
every
you always
time
have
I'm
a
in the
camera.
water,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
I think we're all a bit the same, though, aren't we? I mean, I find it very, very difficult to go out and, say, scout locations because I quite like woodland photography, and I quite like this sort of intimate landscapes, because it's really quite tough to do well. But I find it really difficult to go out and scout locations without actually taking my camera with me. I mean, the conditions might not be right for the photography, and I'd be much better off just with my phone in my pocket. I take Sky out or whatever, and we'll just wander around and identify locations to come back to later. But it's so difficult not to go out with a camera. So I know, I get you entirely. Yeah,
But I suppose what I should mention is that, I'm often working with specialists. And so in each location that I would go, I would, not always, sometimes I just go on my own, but often I'm diving with really, really great guides, sort of I'm diving or going to places with the kind of people and working with the kind of people who would be hired by, National Geographic on assignments as the fixers, by the BBC Natural History Film Unit. So I'm working with them. So I suppose actually the truthful answer is they've done and are doing the scouting part for me, and I go and
they're bringing all that local knowledge. You're getting a lot of the local knowledge maximized. Yeah, it's interesting. You just mentioned Monnier, if I'm saying that correctly, and I always consider him to be, the godfather of high key images. What he did with snowy owls. This was over 20 years ago, and it brings me to an image when I think of high key and what was so unique and distinct about that image, frankly, because it was underwater. I saw it in Bird Photographer of the Year, maybe 2 years ago or last year. I can't remember the exact year. It was awarded. Mm-hmm. It was a shag or a cormorant diving down. And I'm so used to seeing underwater photographs that are rich with saturation, a lot of blues. And that image stuck out because it was monochrome or more high key. And it was very, very unique. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you got that image and what brought you to, going monochrome and going high key, which I think is unique because most underwater photographs, it's the complete opposite of that. It's all about, more darkness, more color, deeper blues, and it's an incredible image. I'd love to hear more about it, frankly.
Yeah, if people haven't seen that image, I don't know whether it's on the Bird Photographer of the Year website, but go and have a look, because I thought that year that image was by far and away, it was head and shoulders above anything else in that competition that I saw.
Amazing shot.
It was incredible. Yeah, it was a really, really great shot.
Well, thank you both. Got to get you on more judging panels, I think.
Well, I was at one stage.
Yeah. So that's an image which I call Between Two Worlds, which is of a cormorant in Baja California Sur in Mexico, which it's a site which has dived a lot, and actually you can reliably see a cormorant hunting on the fish there. But it was my first visit when I took that image, and I actually did it alongside a guy called Christian Wiesel, who is a Mexican underwater photographer, famed for his black and white work, a lot of which is high key. And actually, he was really kind of set a new direction in underwater photography in terms of his black and white work. And I was a big admirer. And as I was there, I was kind of, I think through his influence, I was really thinking a lot in monochrome as I was creating imagery around that time. And so the water was clear. So that was a good thing because it allowed me to take a step back. I've been talking about how you have to be close, but the cormorant in Between Two Worlds is actually small in the frame. And beneath it, you can see this large school of fish just carpeting the bottom. And essentially what the image is you have, it's kind of three elements. You have a white background, you have the dark predatory silhouette of the cormorant, and then you have the fish below. And I think it has a dynamism through the supposed hunting of this bird on the fish below. It shows a measure of abundance in terms of all of these fish. It shows an interaction between kind of a sort of an air-based animal versus water-based animals. And I think the cherry on the top is that you don't really know if the bird is in the air or underwater. And I think that's probably, when I talk to people about that image, that's the first question. It's like, how did you do that? How is it flying? They think it's a split level image, which is something that can be done underwater. It's actually all beneath the surface, but using a high key black and white conversion and pushing the blues, because actually black and white is controlled by color if you're doing it properly. It's those color channels that you can move up and down, even if it's coming out in grayscale. By moving the blue color channels right up and brightening them, I could come out with that composition. And so it's all underwater. The cormorant has just started his dive and is heading down. The fish haven't quite realized yet what's coming. And that's the picture. And I remember I thought I actually pictured it. It was one of those where I could see the frame as I took it, which it doesn't happen much, but it did then. And then I sort of processed it, and I could already see what I wanted to do with it. And then I showed it to Christian, I think, a couple of days later. And Christian was just like a super charismatic Mexican guy. And he looks at it and he goes, "No mames," which my Spanish isn't very good, but I believe that means like, "No way," which I took as the ultimate endorsement from him. So I was like, I was really chuffed with it. And and it has done well in numerous competitions. In fact, that was kind of, I think, one of the really important pictures from earlier on in my career. And it's still one which I would put it on my greatest hits album. So thanks for asking about that one.
It's one of those pictures actually that sticks in my mind. There are very, very few images that do that, particularly of birds, but that's one of them. I think I think that for me would have been my overall winner that year, but obviously, I'm not involved in that competition. I haven't been for a while, but no, for me, that was head and shoulders above anything else that I saw, coming through from those that got awarded. I just thought it was a tremendous image because it's so different, and that's what I think judges like. You'll know yourself from this. If you see something that you haven't seen before, or an approach that's just slightly different, that's what makes them stand out. So
yeah, it's artistic, but it tells a story at the same time too. That's what I love about the image.
So much. Yeah, there's so much.
Normally, one comes at the cost of the other, right? And you have both of those elements in that image. It's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it's. I actually convert very few images to black and white these days. I really feel that I love love it as a discipline, but I'm quite strict with myself that it has to elevate the picture if I'm going to convert it to black and white. So I'm quite, it doesn't, I don't often find moments where I've been doing that. And to your point about the competitions, I think in my experience, it's quite rare and difficult for a black and white image to rise to the grand prize winner in any nature or wildlife photography competition. I think there's a kind of a, I think there's sort of, I think mostly they are very happy to award a powerful image in a category of that nature. But I think as a grand prize winner, I think it strays just a little bit too far from kind of the realism that I think in my experience, most competitions like Wildlife Photographer of the Year, Bird Photographer of the Year, Nature Photographer of the Year are looking for in terms of their grand prize, the one picture which is going to stand for them above all others in that year, which I
think that's a shame. I mean, I can understand it. I think it's a shame though, because I think it's, there's a power in black and white that you don't get with color. And you're absolutely right with what you say about when you're looking at black and white conversions, that black and white conversion should add something to the image, not take it away. So you are actually physically taking the color away, but you're adding an element, an extra wow factor, if you like, to that image. And that's what really makes a successful black and white image. So I think it's a shame that I think you're right in what you say, that it's going to be very, very difficult for a black and white image to scoop the overall price somewhere, because you're taking something away from an actual element. But I think that's a bit of a shame, because I said the power of black and white can be intense, and I think that's what that image for me.
Wild Art would be the obvious.
It would, wouldn't it? Yeah. Well, in fact, our first winner, of course, was a black and white image, and it was an underwater image of those whale sharks.
From the Philippines, actually, I think.
In the Philippines, yeah.
Simply
Simply because of the shape and the form and the storytelling, all those elements we were talking about, with your cormorant image, were present in that image as well. And I think that's what for us made it stand out at the time. I remember the discussion well, on the final judging selection of that picture, and it was just the power that black and white gave that image over the other things we were looking at. So yeah, we're bold enough to choose black and white.
In the wildlife photography community, there is a strong streak of purists, and when it comes to wildlife photography, you look at clothing photography, fashion photography, food photography. There's not a similar strand there when it comes to purism. But when it comes to wildlife photography, it's difficult to crack that nut, especially in some of the competitions that really emphasize behavior, documenting like this dynamic moment of one animal killing the other and the like. That seems to take precedent over black and white and other forms of images that have a more artistic bent to them. And it probably will continue, but it's not always. But I do see it more in wildlife photography than other forms of photography.
Yeah, and I think so. If you look at the sort of, let's say, wildlife photographer, I think there's kind of, if you look at its evolution, there was a moment there where I think they were kind of prizing the artistry of nature very highly, and now I think with everything that's happening in the world and kind of how pressing the environmental crisis is, I think sort of there's almost a decision by them as the leading competition within wildlife photography to emphasize. Actually, I think it's gone from sort of more artistry to documentary, like powerful
Photojournalism,
conservation
yeah.
messages.
Yeah, I was going to
which-
say that because you saw
Yeah.
that with Bird Photographer of the Year as well, didn't you? You know, there was that shift from the artistic through to the documentary style with the was it Roadrunner and the wall,
Trump
which is the
wall,
Mexican
yeah.
wall, yeah, the Trump wall. You know, which won that a couple of years ago? Was that the year that your image?
I think so. Yeah, that was he was a Mexican photographer, ILCP.
Yeah, Alejandro
Yeah.
Rojas. Yeah, Prieto Rojas. Yeah.
But
Because
that was
that's
their
the second
first-
time he's won it as well, isn't it? Because he won with those
he's
flamingos.
the flamingos,
Second or
yeah.
third year I did it. Yeah.
He shoots beautiful stories.
He does. But you're right. You know, I think there has been this shift from, with some of the competitions, from the artistic to the documentary, which is really interesting to see. But I think that's a result of the sentiment shift that we've had. You know, and obviously the wildlife and climate crisis that we're facing. So it's kind of understandable, I think.
Yeah.
This has been a really interesting discussion, which we're over an hour into. We ought to make a second part to this because there are so many things that I wanted to go over and ask you about, Henley, but we just haven't got to them.
Sure.
Just to sort of wrap things up, what sort of advice would you give to people that were thinking about taking that sort of first step into underwater photography? Are there sort of 2 or 3 bits of advice that you would give them?
Well, I think the first step. It's okay. I think the first step, and this would be my message to anyone, is please, at least once in your life, put on a mask and just look beneath the surface of a body of water, because your life will be changed forever, even if you don't see anything aside from the way that light plays with water. It's you're just going to have a whole different perspective on the world, and I think that's something which is really missing, even like and actually even amongst coastal communities that sort of who might be really engaged with the ocean and huge stakeholders in it in terms of their day-to-day survival, but they would have never bothered to actually have a look underneath. And so that's the first thing. Now, if you are interested in underwater photography, well, I would have to presume that you're spending time underwater and that you are, interested from that. And yeah, you need to be. The more time you can spend in the water, the more at ease you're going to be. And if you've got a camera in your hand, then and you become a keen observer, then you're going to see things. I think underwater is really rewarding in that sense, in terms of you're not going to have to work as hard to have a really cool wildlife encounter underwater, pretty much no matter where you are. If you just go and find like some reasonably clear water, and that can be 2-3 meter viz in the UK, you're going to see stuff. And then, I mean, I guess it's like any other. It's like photography in general, isn't it? And especially wildlife photography. It's time, it's effort, it's practice. It's and see where it takes you. If you're looking to invest in equipment, then you kind of need to try and make those investments wisely. There's a big secondhand market, so you can save yourself a lot of money that way. And there are also today some really, really good resources to get you along through mistakes which I surely made and made too often in my early days. So Alex Mustard has a really fantastic book called Underwater Photography Masterclass, and I would definitely recommend get that. It will be the best investment you've made in terms of just understanding the basics, because there are a few differences which you need to understand, those differences for photography to become photography again.
Good advice. Good advice, Henley. We're gonna have to get you back on again, because as I said, there's so much.
Sure.
I think I only half finished my life story.
I know, exactly. Well, I tell you what, we'll have to do Henley part 2, and do the second part of your life story. And
I'll just hog this podcast from now on, then, shall I?
Yeah, well, why not? No, we should definitely do that. But yeah, I mean, so we're well over an hour in. So As usual. I always say to Josh, "Oh, we'll do 50 minutes or so or whatever," and
the time
never
always
does.
flies. Yeah,
it does.
Yeah,
But,
it's fun. It's fun. Yeah.
I always love these discussions because, you know, I never research anything, or very, very rarely research anything for this. And I even said to you in an email, because you sent me one and said, "Oh, well, you know, what do I need to prepare?" And I said, "Nothing. We'll just come on and we'll just have a chat, because this is the basis of the podcast. It's just off the cuff, and I don't edit them really at all either. We just record a conversation and put it out there. So I really hope that people have got something from that and have really enjoyed it. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Henley. I said, and we will get you back again, because there are so many things that I wanted to cover and we just haven't really had the time to. So thank you for that. And if people want to reach out to you or follow you on Instagram, for example, what's your Instagram handle, as it were?
Well, thank you. It's reciprocated on my side. Thank you for having me. It's been very enjoyable. Hopefully I can come back. And if you'd like to have a look at my images, Instagram, I'm quite easy to find, Henley Spiers, or my website is henleyspiers.com. I'm also on Facebook. I'm pretty easy to find because I've got quite an unusual first name.
Yeah. And I'll leave those links anyway in the show notes so people can find them there as well. So what's next for you, Henley? Because I know you do get about a bit, don't you?
Yeah, well, I need to. So I'm doing all UK based until October, and at the moment, so I've been appointed as the first ever Oceanographic magazine storyteller in residence, and so I'm in the middle of shooting and and researching for my first story on that, which is going to be based in a few locations around Scotland, including Shetland. So I will be soon heading to the Isle of Arran, which is quite a special marine conservation success story, and trying to better understand that. So that's what's next. Some cool dry suit diving.
I was going to say, you'll have your dry suit for that one.
Yeah.
Because we're not talking warm tropical waters there, that is for sure. But yeah, an amazing part of the talking about Shetland as we were before we came on. It's certainly something where I want to go back to, and on a regular basis. And I think Josh is the same. We were blown away by that. So
sure.
That'll be the subject of another podcast, which we'll record shortly. But Henley, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. And I'll link all your websites and your Instagram accounts in the show notes below. So I hope everybody's enjoyed that. Please, if you can and you have enjoyed the content, then do give us a rating, because that really helps the algorithms find the podcast and push it out to more people. So ratings, comments, any sort of feedback would be greatly appreciated. It's kind of I think I heard this on another podcast. It's kind of a gentleman's agreement that if you've enjoyed the content, then you'll do that sort of thing for us, because it helps us reach more people, as I said. So any sort of comment or rating, good or bad, hopefully good because you've enjoyed it. But just leave it in the comments section or the ratings on your favorite podcast platform. Be greatly appreciated. Thanks once again, Henley. Great to talk to you, and we'll have you on again soon. Josh, thanks as always, and we'll get together soon, and we'll get Rebecca Nason on, and we'll have a chat about Shetland next up. So
sounds good.
That should be fun. Anyway, thanks to you both. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you all again next time. You have been listening to the Wildlife Photography Podcast. If you have enjoyed the content, then please help us to spread the word by sharing a link on your social media platforms, giving us a like, and leaving us a comment. See you all again next time.